You're talking about a 5-hour dive.
You try and dive those kids the whole way, all you'll be bringing out is dead bodies.
With oxygen running low, the entire nation is anxiously waiting for what will happen next.
What are you thinking?
Just a crazy idea. You've got a skill none of the rest of us have.
No.
Man's already died.
We'll do nothing. We'll be bringing them out dead for sure.
So you are expecting casualties?
Yes. I expect casualties.
Hey, Jennifer Walden here. Welcome to Mix's Sound for Film Award Season virtual event. I'm here with the sound team on Amazon Video's 13 Lives, directed by Ron Howard. We're here with BAFTA and MPSE award-winning Supervising Sound Editor Rachael Tate, who earned an Oscar nom for her work on 1917. Rachael also worked on No Time to Die, News of the World, and The Martian, and others. So, hey, Rachael, thank you so much for being here to chat about 13 Lives.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for having us.
We also have CAS award-winning re-recording mixer William Miller, who earned an Oscar nom for mixing News of the World. William has mixed The Last Duel, Count Me In, and many more. Hey, William, thanks for joining us.
Hey, nice to be here. Thanks for having us.
And last but certainly not least is BAFTA and MPSE award-winning Supervising Sound Editor, Sound Designer Oliver Tarney, who has earned 5 Oscar nominations for his work on No Time to Die, News of the World, 1917, The Martian, and Captain Phillips. Hey, Oliver, it's so nice to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here, Jennifer. Thanks for having us.
So I'm sure you guys have seen the documentary on The Cave, which is the real story of 13 Lives. This is the dramatic telling of it. But because this is a dramatic retelling of the events and not a documentary, what were you able to do sonically that the documentary sound team wouldn't be able to do? Like, how did this being a dramatic film sort of free you to take creative license sonically to help tell the story of this incredible rescue?
I guess one of the main things would be scale, that we can, we have a larger canvas to use, and by not, cutting away to anyone talking about what happened, everything has to be described with the events, whether that's the script or the work that we're doing to augment that in terms of sound or it be music. And so there was there's a movie element to it, but the film still had a very journalistic style to it, and so it still felt very real to us, and we just had to work with that, augment that, and make it as gripping as possible, but still feel authentic, which was Ron was very clear about early on, that he still wanted it to feel, like a very authentic project.
And you notice he's not sensationalizing the story. He's quite realistically telling it how it was, quite technically. It's almost a cross between a documentary and a traditional Hollywood movie, and so we didn't want to go full fictional movie style. We wanted to keep that edge of, this is how it would be if you were actually in that space, if you were in those caves, if you were on those streets. Close your eyes and you're there, and that's our basis for the soundtrack, pretty much.
Yeah, and even underwater, to try and lend the viewer some sense of what it would be like to have your senses compromised in the way that being underwater does to your hearing, and so that it felt a little bit more subjective for the viewer when you're watching it, rather than you're watching a depiction from somebody else, listening to a depiction from somebody else of what it was like. You're trying to lend them what that experience would be like through the sounds that we designed and chose and mixed.
Yeah. And even the way that the film's put together as well, with all those diving sequences, they're shot in a way that allows you to be super immersive with the sound that we put to that. We've got the POV shots, we're kind of right tight in there in the cave system with them. So, the sound that we're adding to that kind of is allowing us to put us in that place and feel really claustrophobic and kind of right there with them as they're going through what they're going through. This super intense storyline, and it's kind of hard as well, they couldn't see much with all the silt and everything kicking up, in those cave systems. So trying to describe those journeys that they're going through with sound was a big part of what we were trying to do, trying to tell that story with sound, because they're disorientated and not able to see what's going on. So we're trying to help that story move on with by telling it through using sounds to make you kind of feel like you're in there with them.
Yeah, and Ron had a very clear idea that there would be two big parts to this story. There would be what happens in the caves and what happens outside, and that should be a sort of yin and yang. So you have the very MIDI rolled off kind of underwater soundscape, but then when you go outside, it fully opens up. You've got the water splashing around and the voices everywhere, and there's extras all around the camera all the time, talking about very technical things and getting on with it, and it's frenetic outside. And so they really wanted you to see the difference between those two, and the way it's cut really helps with that. So we try and emphasize the night and day between those two worlds.
And how were you able to make that, enhance that on the mix side? Obviously, you built really great backgrounds for outside. What did you do for inside the cave and underwater to help it feel so enclosed?
Well, there's, I guess, the two sides, the sound design and the mix, is sort of blurred anyway. And when we kind of talked a lot about it, even before we got to the premixes, about how we'd approach that. But the two elements for the underwater, the two aspects of how sound behaves underwater. One is that you kind of hear through bone conduction, or you register sound through bone conduction, so you don't have these top frequencies. So naturally, you have a very mid-centric quality to the sound design. So when we were designing them, that was part of it. And the other part is the speed of sound in water is about 4.5 times faster than air. So we can't calibrate in the same way where a sound is coming from. So that was a big part of when we were designing all the sounds to try and make it, that was part of trying to sell that subjectivity. Is normally when you're watching a film, you hear a sound. If it's panned right, it's panned right because an event's happening on the right, or vice versa. But you can help anchor the audience to an event that's happening, and you make it easy for them to go, look at that part of the screen, look at this part of the screen. In this way, by diverging everything and making it very sort of wide, the soundscape, if you hear an event happening, you're not sure where it's coming from. So the audience has to look around the screen to see what it was that was making that noise, just like it would be underwater for these divers. It's a very disconcerting thing to have your senses compromised in that way. And so that was a really useful tool for us. We thought, certainly on a big screen, it works incredibly well. If you're on a huge screen and you see an event happening, but you hear it somewhere else, or you just hear the event and then you have to look for where it's where the source is.
Yeah.
And then,
I mean, this is an idea that came up quite early on. I think it was like the first attempt you'd pitch the idea to Ron to have, to help sell these two different spaces and these two different worlds, about this concept that sound travels so much faster underwater, and this kind of sense of disorientation when we're with those guys underwater. So what we did was, in sort of the mix side of things, is we took all the elements that we had, and we had, there's quite a mixture of things going on in terms of, we've got all the background elements, then we have the specific elements, and there's the tank clangs and the breaths. So we did a mixture of things to each band to try and help sell the idea. A lot of the backgrounds and the spot effects, we sort of did a divergence thing in, and using the Dolby Atmos kind of, array kind of helped do this, and creating different spreads on different bands of elements. So it's not the same amount of divergence on everything. It's different each time. So when you hear different sounds, they've got different amounts of divergence happening. So kind of helps create this sense of, oh, did I hear that thing come from over there? And depending where you're sat in the cinema, you'll hear it come out from different spaces. That's kind of the whole thing we were going for. We didn't, to create that whole sense of, disorientation when you're down there. So, but there are also other elements in there that we kept slightly more localized just to help sell certain plot things. So, when you're up close, we've got the breaths and all those kind of things. They are right with you. And sometimes we kind of do a diverge thing around the back, but they're much more focused on what's going on. So it was to help sell that, two different spaces. And I think these guys in the rescue spoke about the fact that when they're in underwater, there's almost this sense of catharsis when they're down there. They find it kind of, almost there's kind of this Zen space for them, away from the outside world, despite it being this kind of crazy, tight space that most people would panic in. They have this other reaction to it where they can remain calm in there. So, at moments, throughout their diving, where it's not necessarily trying to create a sense of panic. We can use this kind of world to kind of create that thing that they were describing in the documentary.
And similarly, we can also emphasize that the people who aren't used to cave diving were more panicked down there. Like when the Thai Navy SEALs first go in, you can tell from the breaths, from the amount of tank clangs and how much movement there is, that they are really not used to this and they are exerting too much energy. And then later on, when Rick and John go through, it's a lot more metered, and you really see the difference between those, which that's another thing that I think is adding to the story that maybe the documentary doesn't do, that we show a progression.
Let's talk about some of the dialogue challenges, because you're dealing with a set that is very wet. There is water and rain everywhere. Exterior rain, and then all the water dripping into the caves, and then also the underwater scenes. So what challenges did that pose for you in terms of dialogue?
Yeah, there's water everywhere. Everywhere, even when you can't see it, it's there. It's all the time, 100% water. It was a lot of ADR. I won't lie, there was a lot. But we saved as much production as we could. And it's just a tough sound to get out of dialogue. It's quite broad a lot of the time. And plus, when you're underwater, we liaised a lot with Paul Brincat, who's the production mixer. He was very open to testing microphones at the beginning, and we tried to get a hydrophone in there while they were actually diving. But
the filtration system in the whole thing meant there was a hum. So.
Yeah, it's like a wee the whole way through. And there's for the current, they have pumps pushing the water through. So between the pump and the filtration system, so anything underwater is 100% rebuilt. But we managed to get a lot of more than I thought. In the end, we managed to get clean, but just for clarity, especially when say for instance, there's a scene where Viggo and Colin, John and Rick, are in a small cave, and one side of the cave falls in on them, and they shout to each other, "We've got to get out of here, let's go." That bit, I'm afraid it had to be, because between the boom op and the actors was torrential water. There was nothing that could be done. And similarly, there was a lot of ADR also for dialect reasons, because Ron was very keen that this be 100% authentic, even for any Thai person in any part of Thailand or the world watching it. And there are 4 main dialects I've learned in Thailand, and that's not just different accents, that's different timings, phrases. They're quite different. What you would speak in Bangkok, Central Thai, is very different to what you would speak in Northern Thailand, around the cave area. So we had to make sure that every character was speaking the correct dialect for their character, which about 7 weren't. So they needed to work with a voice coach for a few days before their sessions, and we had to then fit new phrases, new timings into the existing mouth. So that was quite a lot. And my Thai is patchy. It's patchy. That's it. So it was tricky. And I had help from a lot of Thai people, because Ron was very keen that Thai people throughout the post-process be watching it and giving their honest opinion. Is this what it was like? Does that sound correct to you? He's not just going to put some Thai in there. It has to be correct. And he was so focused on that. We had no choice, but I'm so glad that we did it. And same goes for the crowd, which we actually shot with Alex Boyson. He's our man in the field. He lives out in Thailand, and he shot proper crowd from about 40 minutes away from the cave. So extremely local.
And it's the boys playing football. It was the street markets. It was the food in the street market sizzling. It was the bamboo being cut down. It was, workers, who'd go and record in those correct scenarios, so that they would do shouts in sort of a little wooded area and then go out and do a market or at the playing field. So, he was absolutely super excited about working on it and just went the extra mile and just really delivered. And so it just added yet another layer of authenticity for us.
And his Thai wife translated for me. She was amazing. There was a lot of help, and we had Thai producers as well, and we needed all the help we could get. We had to make it accurate and authentic. And so in total, we had roughly 550 cues, which is about 5 times more than I'd usually cue for a film. And it was shot across 4 continents. There was a lot shot in Australia, because obviously a lot of the actors live in Australia where it was shot. So although they are Thai, they have an Aussie accent, and that was something that needed to be fixed. And the
sense of the world coming together is all the additional flavours.
In fact, in this room, just over there, we shot a crowd with 8 different countries of people came in. It's still in COVID era, so they were all very separated. And I looked at the volunteers that turned up when it happened and looked at the top 8 countries, because I know there were 17 countries total present there. We don't have the budget for that. So I picked the top 8, and it included Sweden, America, France, Germany, Spain. I'm going to forget one. There were a lot. And we had them all here, liaising with each other in their languages and across different to other languages in English, as you would usually in an international place. And they played the journalists and the volunteers. So we had quite a lot of crowd.
And again, that's that above the cave system, a very multinational effort coming together to try and help in any way they could. And then the isolation of just, a couple of people there 3 hours down a cave on their own. So it was really nice to have that contrast between the world coming together and then just, 1 or 2 or 3 people down there. It was always nice to keep flip-flopping and having that.
I think a great scene for showing that is when they find out the boys are actually alive, and they come back with the camera and they give it to the Thai Navy SEALs, and then word spreads across the camp. And there's a big use of crowd in that. You see it starts small and it goes wider and wider to it. You end up on a big top shot with everyone going crazy. And
just that wave of information that's sweeping through the whole camp.
And it just heightens that contrast between the 2 men on their own and the thousands outside, thinking this is it, they're going to come out now, and they know they don't think they are. So it's isolation and mass. It plays really well.
And so I guess, Will, I have to ask, if you had to pick one scene that best represents your work on the film, which I guess was effects, you mixed the effects on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you had to pick a scene that best represented your work on it, what scene would that be and why?
Probably the very first dive sequence that the very first time that Rick and John go in to start trying to find the boys. So they've there's a whole bunch of things going on there as they walk through into the caves, and we've got we're going from outside where it's raining, and we're going into this, into the very first part of the caves where we see them starting to prep all the pumps and everything. So we've kind of trying to create a sense that there's all this busying activity as they're going through. We kind of have the generator going off, and then we use that to kind of create a sense of, this huge space, with the huge low end on the reverb of the generator going off. And then as they walk through, we've got all the water coming down, to make sure you've kind of like still staying connected with the fact that this monsoon season is kicking off and these caves are starting to really flood up. And then of course we get them going into the kind of the tighter part of the cave as the water's, started to flood up, and then we go into that initial dive, and that's the first point in the film where we really get a sense of, I know we have that the Navy SEALs have gone in previously, but this is the real first point in the film where our main characters are going into this environment, and so that was the first point of shift, and the first point where we're really introducing this idea of the diverged sounds that we spoke about earlier, and this kind of like this new world that we were kind of creating, and them going through it. And it starts off relatively gentle, and we're kind of introduced to this thing, and the fact that it's quite tight, and there's a few little moments where they kind of tanks get caught and they bang their heads on the stalactites, and and they're starting to go through, and then of course they reach the first the first milestone, which is an already flooded part, but then we have, the rocks like smashing through, and then suddenly we're kind of like, straight into this kind of panic where they're kind of getting pulled under and rushed through the currents, and we're kind of like trying to create that sense of panic. And of course we then find one of the workers that's stuck in the cave, and they've got to get him out, and we're then introduced to the using sound to explain that how horribly kind of claustrophobic this space is, and him panicking, and then trying to get out. So I guess like that as a sequence is a kind of like great example of the sound work that we've kind of done on this.
And it's a telling that originally there was music in the early stages of the film during that opening dive, but once they heard how it sounded, that was dropped. And I think that's really good because it gives you a moment to really be immersed in it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the frequencies occupied, I think Oliver had a conversation with Ben.
Yeah, it was really good, honest conversation early on. I think it was always it's best to have a conversation with the composer early on, so we don't fight over the same frequency. And I just said we're going to try and do this thing where it feels sort of realistic, and we are going to be using up this mid band. If there's any way you could try and avoid that to some degree at least, then we can play more harmoniously. And he brought into that early on. He was very collaborative in that way. And so it felt like when the music did come in, it didn't have to be an either or. We could kind of coexist for a bit, and then we would lead, and then he would lead in other places. So it felt, very good that we could hand the baton back and forth between us.
Another thing to note about just in general, the kind of the water work that has been done on this film, obviously having in mind the entire time that this is an Amazon film, so this is going to end up on streaming services, this as well, we'd created this incredible immersive theatrical experience. Trying to get that same sense across, in a home theater was always on our minds throughout the process. So we did spend a lot of time post the theatrical mix, working on, the home theatrical mixes. And, cause you want to, we're using kind of those awkward frequencies that sometimes can get lost on, sound bars and just, TVs and everything. So that mix has had a lot of work go into, preserving those low frequencies. So we kind of took some subharmonic generators and we're feeding the effect stems and the water sound effects back through that, and kind of putting, bell EQs with big gains on at certain frequencies we felt that were getting lost when we listened to it on a soundbar. And we were kind of inching through the film and through all those water scenes, and
even there was some pitch shifting of localized areas where you just felt like, okay, too deep.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk about your sound work, sound edit and mix on 13 Lives. Like I said before, even knowing everyone gets out alive, I was on the edge of my seat. So fantastic job on the sound, and best of luck to all of you this award season. Thanks again for being here with me.
Thank you
very much. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.